Erick Robinson. Erick got started coming down here to the Peach Meet several years ago. He actually lives in Fremont, New Hampshire. And but I think a lot of you know Doug Fowler, and Doug Fowler used to travel a lot up north to places like Nashua, and he met up with Erick and talked him into coming down here to this show, and he's been attending ever since. Erick has been in, he and his wife Joyce have been involved in trading antique tools since 2009. They currently own and operate the Vintage Tool Shop in Fremont, New Hampshire, and probably a lot of y'all get his weekly newsletter. It's an email newsletter, and if you don't, talk to Erick and he'll sign you up for it. It's very interesting. Today's presentation, he's going to talk about the evolution of the Stanley bench plane. So without further ado, I'll turn the lights out here, and Erick, come on up here and get started. You want to use this, or you want to use?
No, use this.
Can you scoot Erick closer to the screen so I can get both of them in video?
I'll turn that to you.
Is that okay?
I don't know. There you go.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Erick Robinson. Like Steve said, my wife and I own the Vintage Tool Shop in Fremont, New Hampshire. I want to discuss today the development of the Stanley bench plane from Type 1 all the way up to Type 20. A lot of this information comes from Roger Smith's type study. It was first published in the patented transitional metallic planes in America. That was the blue book. Then it was also in John Walter's book. So to get started with no further ado, this is a Type 1. A couple of the features of the Type 1, it has the horizontal post that the nut adjusts the iron on. These early ones had the solid nut. It had the horizontal post was slotted, and Bailey's had Wood's name removed from the nut. This is the horizontal post with the slot. Technically, this is the development of almost every metal plane that was ever made. No matter who the maker was, it was all sort of based on this patent. This is the L. Bailey patent date, December 21st, 1867. It's on the iron. It's called the A trademark. This is on the iron cap. All of the lever caps then were solid back, and they had what's called the banjo spring. Also, the number of the plane was always embossed into the lever cap. They had, another familiar feature is that they had what's called the I frog seat. This was also on the Type 2s. They had round head screws holding the frog on. This is a Type 2. The difference between a Type 1 and Type 2 is see how it no longer has the banjo spring on the lever cap, it has a rectangle spring. The most interesting to me is the Type 3. The Type 3 had this very unusual frog where the screws held the frog on through a rib between the two sides of the plane. Now this frog was used on every size from number 3 all the way up to number 8. I'm sure Stanley looked at it as a possible cost savings method, making one frog for all planes. However, it was only lived for a very short time. You can see it still had round head screws, and you can see the vertical rib that the frog was attached to. It was the beginning of what's called the small recess nut. This is right-hand thread, and Bailey's patent information is embossed on the inside of that nut. There's the nut, and it is the start of what's called the J trademark. Some people call this the beehive trademark. It also is the beginning of the recessed lever cap. So this is a type 4. These were the last of the pre-laterals, which referred to as the pre-lateral. They didn't have a lateral adjustment. They had Philister head screws instead of round head screws. But, and they had a standard frog seat. But it is wider than the I or the H seat. It gave the frog more stability. We go to a type 5. The type 5 was the first lateral lever. You can see the lateral lever came down and was clinched, and that's how it adjusted the iron a little left or a little right. This was, there's 2 patent dates on this lateral lever. One is for the clinch, and the other one is actually for the pinning the lever to the frog. See, there's another example of it, a different view. And it shows the pivot pin and the lateral lever.
And what was the date of that patent?
I will tell you, the date of that patent was February 8th, 1876, and the date for the pin was 1884. However, they didn't start doing the lateral lever till 1885. So Stanley had this in their arm, so to speak, for nearly 10 years before they actually applied it. Now, could they have been using up old frogs because they didn't want to throw them away? It's a possibility. Okay. This is a type 6. Now, the type 6 is the beginning of the more modern plane. It has the disc. This disc was Trott's patent in 1884. These lateral levers will have 3 patent dates on them. It also still has the recessed lever cap and the small right-hand nut for adjusting the iron. We start next with what's, you can see the small, it still has Philister head screws. Now this is the lever cap from a type 6A. 6As were 1891 to 1892. There's a dimple casting on the back of the lever cap. There'll be a dimple underneath the frog as well as one behind the bed, behind the frog seat on the bed. Dimple for type 6A. This was also the beginning of Shade's 1892 patent for the hole being at the bottom of the iron, and so you could sharpen the iron without removing the iron cap. There's not a lot of difference between 6As, 7s, and 8s. The 7s had S casting on the lever cap, they had S casting behind the frog, and S casting underneath the frog. These were made from 1893 to 1899. That was a fairly long run. And then we have type 8. Again, the only real difference between a 6A, 7, and 8 is the casting marks from the casting factor. These are B's, and the 8s were made from 1899 to 1902. We're going to go to a type 9. Type 9, they begin putting Bailey's name on the toe. They have what's called the small buttress. This is when they began to raise the frog seat. You can see how the frog seat is up, and they have a small buttress. They have 2 patent dates on behind the frog. Now, I believe that they were waiting because they had Edmund Shade's patent for the frog adjusting screw. I believe that this was the beginning of them thinking to put the frog adjusting screw on the Bailey patent, but they were still trying to push bedrocks. They have what's called the T trademark, or some people call it the Banner trademark. This was used up until near the end of the Type 9s. Type 10. This was made from 1907 to 1909. It has Edmund Shady's frog adjusting screw. That is I wonder, and I'm just putting this out there, I wondered if the reason why Stanley waited to put the frog adjusting screw on is because they no longer had to pay Bailey for his tools. When he had passed away, and so their commission to him was no longer, so they waited because they knew this would increase sales. This is just a thought I have. I'm not going to swear by it. But, you know, Stanley was a fairly company that liked to make money. And you can see this is the beginning of what's called the large buttress. One of the reasons for the large buttress is it allegedly helped keep the frog square to the mouth. And this is what's called the WW trademark. The WW trademark came out because it was unknown when Roger first did the first type study. It wasn't until later on that they came up with this, so that's why it has a sort of a number that's out of sequence. Okay. This is the Type 11. This is the plane that Paul Sellers claims if you have only one plane, this is the only plane you need. But of course, he was speaking of a number 4, and this is a number 3. The type, Paul Sellers says that the V trademark, which is what this is, was the last iron that Stanley made that was laminated steel. I'm going to tell you, I know I've seen sweethearts with laminated steel, but most of these, all the V trademarks I've seen have the laminated steel. Okay. They added the April 19th, 1910 patent date to behind the frog, and that is for the Edmund Shady's frog adjusting screw. We go to Type 12. This is the beginning of the sweetheart era. Many people say that this is the best of Stanley. They were still making a very good product at this time. The couple of the features is, I'm just going to show you quickly a couple of the sweetheart trademarks. This was the earliest one. It's called the X trademark. It has New Britain, Connecticut, USA, and the word Stanley has to be bumped up to be above the sweetheart. This was continued with the Stanley being bumped up into the sweetheart, but they eliminated the New Britain, Connecticut part and just had made in USA. This is called the Y trademark. And there's a sample of the Y trademark. And this is the AA trademark. This trademark was used for quite some time, from around 1923 all the way up until the early 30s. It's the one you're going to see most often, and it was on like some 13, 14, and 15 planes. And there's an example of it. Okay, the other thing about 12s, there's not a lot of difference between 12s and 11s, except for it was the start of the tall front knob. And that was, a lot of people like that, some people don't. I think it's more popular among carpenters over woodworkers. Carpenters have more of a tendency to push their work, and woodworkers usually work over their work. Okay, and that's the brass nut with the threaded rod that held that on. Those were long ones. It also was the start of what's called the large brass adjusting nut. Previous to this, the adjusting nuts were 7/8 of an inch wide. When these started, they were 1.25 inches. I find that reaching in and using the large brass nut is a lot more convenient because it's easier for your finger to turn, and it seems like it has more, more accuracy in adjusting the nut. And you can see there's the sizes. The earlier ones were 7/8 of an inch, and the later ones were 1.25 inches. Some lever caps of this era have the sweetheart mark. Now, I used to think that they were only in planes in Maine because the first 3 I ever found were always in planes from Maine. However, then later on I found some on planes from Connecticut. I found some on planes from New Jersey, and I know of some that are on planes in Pennsylvania. But it is a fairly uncommon mark. And it's only been found that I know of on Stanley 4s. Okay, this is a Type 13. This is the beginning of when Stanley still had the keyhole lever cap, but they began putting what's called the notch rectangle trademark on the lever cap. You can see some of these lever caps were nickel plated, not too many, but some of them you'll find nickel plated, and you can see the notch rectangle logo and the keyhole mark. And Type 13s went to a single patent date behind the frog. Only the Edmund Shady's frog adjusting patent. And we go to a Type 14. Type 14s were made from 1928 to 1930. The difference between a 14 and a 13 is only they began putting Made in USA on the toe, and they had a raised ring for holding the knob. You can see the raised ring right here. The Made in USA is very clear. And other than that, it still had a single patent date behind the frog. Still using sweetheart irons. There's a better shot of the Made in USA. That was on a 4. Type 15. I like Type 15s only because some of them, not all of them, have the orange frog. For some reason, the orange frog is very collectible. It doesn't do any better job than the 13 or 14 or 11 or 12. But because it was orange, people collect them. You can see some of the orange paint remaining there. You can see some of the orange paint again remaining. Now, the other thing is they moved Made in USA behind the frog. Some of them are on the 4s and wider. It is in line with the patent date. This happens to be a number 3 where they stuck it alongside. Here again, they're still using the keyhole with Stanley notch rectangle. This happens to be a pretty good nickel-plated one. And now we're at Type 16. There are a lot of people who claim that this is the beginning of the end. Type 16s were made from 1933 to 1941. There are people, okay, this was a patent for what's called the kidney-shaped lever cap screw. The theory is that if on the keyhole ones, if there was enough pressure, it could push the lever cap up, and hence your iron would come off the frog and all this. So Stanley put this kidney in, claiming that it would hold the lever cap better than the keyhole style. I can't say that it does, but I think it was good marketing. This was also the start of what's called the BB or the notch rectangle trademark. This trademark is still used today, and it was used you know, from this time on. The other thing is you can see that the frog is no longer what they called round top. It is an OG style. I have had instructors from major woodworking schools tell me that that frog doesn't support the iron as well as a round back frog. I tell them you can cut the iron off just above the lever cap screw, tighten that whole thing down, and it'll work as good as if you had that full base on the earlier frogs or not. That's just insanity. But what am I? I'm not a teacher. Okay, this is a Type 17. Type 17s are the war years. And Stanley did a lot to begin saving money. Many do not have a frog adjusting screw. I was told one time that the reason why is that Stanley was using a lot of younger employees, you know, kids in high school or whatever, and they didn't have the ability to drill the hole square or straight. And so they had a lot of damage. I can't say that that's the truth. I think that they were just trying to save the screw and the clip. And there's 3 parts there, and they were just saving the money. They also there was 2 iron adjusting nuts during the war. The first one, the earlier ones, were a small steel nut. It was the 7/8 size, same size as the old brass ones, but it was made of steel. Then they went to this, what they called hard rubber nut, that is just sort of formed over a piece of brass. Naturally, the brass was being used to make bullets, so brass became very expensive. Also, instead of using the brass nut with the rod, they went to a screw during the war. And you can see here, this is just the frog seat, and you can see how the frog is sort of kept square by the buttress. And also, if you'll notice here, that the cheeks are much thicker. The reason the cheeks were thicker is because they put potash in the iron when they were casting it. This made it so that it was cheaper to produce the iron. However, they needed to make the walls thicker so it wouldn't break. Otherwise, the casting was too flimsy. Type 18. This is getting out of the war and beginning to be into the more modern America. This happens to have a very nice tote on it, but the main thing about 18s, they were made from 1946 to 1947. They went back to a brass nut that was diagonally knurled. You can see the angles on the knurling. And many of the early ones had painted black handles. Okay, this is a Type 19. The first thing about the main difference is they went back to the old style non-diagonally knurled brass nut. They began using the rounded top on the iron where it's just a little bit rounded off. And they began printing Stanley vertically on the lateral lever. I have seen this both printed as if you're reading it from the front. I've seen it also printed as if you're reading it from the back. There seems to be no rhyme or reason why they printed it one way or another, or stamped it one way or another. Also with a Type 19, they started this drop-down buttress. I am sure the purpose of this was to save money. You can see that there's not that big arch for the buttress, and it's the beginning of the end, shall we say. The drop buttress. There's a better picture of it. And now Type 20. Type 20s were made from 1962 to 1984. They use a solid steel nut. They began using, I don't know, Okay, they began using this folded lateral lever, where forever and ever and ever, they always used a T lateral lever. You can also see that they began to use a two-piece Y lever, it's two pieces of steel instead of one cast piece. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Yes, the Stanley planes that I see today, India, Mexico, where they're coming from?
Most of the Stanley planes that are brand new, most of them are coming out of Mexico. I think that there's not enough plane sales for Stanley to really care. They don't, they sell billions of those 25-foot tapes, and they make a lot of money on that. How many planes can you sell? There's so many of the old ones around, and they're a lot better, and then in most cases, that people are buying the old ones and cleaning them up, tuning them up, and using them. A lot of these new ones are just. I was talking to a guy. He sells tools at a school. Right? They were buying those new 62s that come out of Mexico, and he had to take them to a machine shop to have them the sides vertical, perpendicular to this bed. Yeah, and so I said, how much is that costing you? He goes, well, it only cost me about $50 each, but I'm only getting the planes for $162. He says, that's still better than going out and buying the 62 that's used. I don't know. I'd say buy the 62. Buy the old ones.
Erick, can you make a comment on the portable scanning machine? What was the effective date on blue scanning and also
Right. It seems to me, from what from the planes I sell quite frequently, around 68 they experimented with this blue, maybe 65 possibly, but they were just trying to pretty things up just to, bring attention to them. There were so many players in the business, and people were buying Stanley planes with the Montgomery Ward name on them, and the only difference was the frog adjusting screw. Maroon was later, and I've heard from a couple people that the maroon ones, the casting was a lower quality casting. I can't testify that, I would love to have enough money to just take those planes and break them to see what the breaking point is. Anyone else?
Any comment on the Lee Valley powdered metal blades as replacements for steel?
Lee Valley?
Lee Valley makes powdered metal blades that are much harder than the A1, etc.
Well, that is actually, Lee Valley bought Hawk. And I would probably say that those are Hawk.
Well, they make a blade that will fit a Stanley.
Right. And I can't say that I'm more of an advocate of buying, there's a German manufacturer, Gert Fritz, who makes an incredible blade. They all come cryogenetically treated, and you can buy them in the thicker size, which is like in our world, 3.3, or you can buy them in 0.22, which is like about an 1/8 inch. They'll fit Stanley perfectly every time. A lot of guys will take those Hawk irons because they're fatter, and they open up the throat because the iron won't fit in it otherwise. So it just seems like, I don't know. I think Hawk makes a good blade. I just don't know if I like the idea of opening up the throat of a plane. Although, if you take the old the number 3 size Handymans, those are great to open up the throat put a little chamfer on the iron, and you now have a cheap scrub plane that you probably bought the plane for $5 at the flea market and spent an hour fixing it up, and instead of going to buy a $120 number 40 scrub. But that's the only time I think you ought to modify a plane. Anyone else? Well, if you have any other questions, I'll be sitting here for a little bit, sort of picking up, and I don't mind talking about Stanley bench planes. Thank you.